I'm author and critic David Agranoff. I'm a horror and science fiction author, critic, and researcher. In this podcast, I wanted to provide in-depth interviews and panel discussions with everyone from New York Times bestselling authors to researchers, musicians, and anyone I find interesting. Welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. I am your host, David Agranoff, and I am the author of The Last Night to Kill Nazis, which is out nationwide in Barnes & Nobles. I got to take a second to at least pitch that out there before we get into David Mack and his book, my guest. And I also, because I know there's a bunch of you Star Trek people that are coming to this podcast for the first time. And if you are out there and you are Star Trek people, hang around, subscribe, because we cover lots of science fiction. I'm currently doing a series on the history of the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. I'm doing all kinds of panels. The next episode after this one will be Robert Heinlein's The Roads Must Roll from 1940. And so I'm bringing in these like awesome panels to talk about with experts and academics to talk about these stories. We've already done Martian Odyssey by Stanley Weinbaum. We've done Helen Alloy by Lester Del Roy, and John W. Campbell's Twilight are all out there. So check those out. So if you're new to this podcast, what we do is we get under the hood with writers, mostly science fiction and horror. And when we're not doing panel episodes, we have guests. We usually focus down on a book. Now, I have to admit, I only got David's book like 2 days ago, so I've only read the first 100 pages, but we're still going to get deeply into it. And he's promoting a Star Trek Picard tie-in novel called Firewall, which we will get to in a bit. But first, David, how did you discover science fiction, Star Trek? How did you become the envy of nerds everywhere?
Wow, that's a lot of questions rolled into one.
Yeah, sorry.
Let's see. Let's
start big.
With well, let's take it apart and we'll examine it piece by piece. Star Trek. How did I get exposed to Star Trek? Well, as I like to say, I imprinted on it the way a duckling imprints on the first moving thing it sees. I grew up watching the syndicated reruns of Trek in the early 70s. So I must have rewatched every episode about 10, 20 times before Star Trek The Motion Picture came out. And so I was a Trek fan pretty much right from the beginning. Trek formed my worldview. It basically set the template for the future I would hope to see. One of people choosing to work together in friendship and cooperation and in peace to explore the galaxy, to seek out new mysteries and push forward the edges of human knowledge. And so that, of course, was a great foundation from which to discover more science fiction. Starting from Trek, it also helped that I loved books from the very beginning. Loved having my mom read to me as a little kid, and then as I got older, when she would run weekend errands, she would drop me off at the town library. I'd stay down in the kids section, and the librarians would make sure I didn't wander off and go staggering into traffic or something. And I would stay down there, and sometimes I'd read, the Charlie Brown comic collections, but I also would dig into the science fiction books. I remember one of the first science fiction books I ever read was called The Space Eagle. Maybe, not a Pulitzer Prize winning book, perhaps not a Hugo contender, but it was fun. Nuclear threat on Christmas Day, and the Space Eagle hero has to, prevent Armageddon or whatever and negotiate peace and whatnot.
Who
So
was that one written by? I have an encyclopedic knowledge of science fiction and
you'd have to
nonfiction.
look it up. I actually don't remember the name of the author. I always remember the title.
Title,
I
right?
looked it up one time. It's out there. It's like there's rare copies of it floating around used that you can buy on like eBay. It's a very obscure title, but I remember it. It made an impression on my young brain. And from there, I read, Pierre Boulle's version of Planet of the Apes. I read that version before I saw the film version, so I actually had his version in my head first. I started reading Bradbury very young. I loved Bradbury, so I grew up reading all his stuff: Martian Chronicles, Illustrated Man, Something Wicked This Way Comes. I mean, I was into all of it. And then, of course, that led me to Asimov, that led me to Heinlein, that led me to Clark. So going through a lot of the old white guy masters of that particular era. And then I got into cinematic science fiction, obviously with Star Trek and then Star Wars. I love Star Wars in its own right. As much as I love Star Trek, Star Trek is my first love. I also really dig Star Wars.
Yeah.
They're very different, but I think they have complementary messages. Star Trek it's better to have a future where we work together in peace and democratic socialism and all that sort of thing, and that's beautiful. But what Star Wars reminds us is there are always going to be autocratic fascist nut jobs among you who are going to try to burn it all down, and every generation is going to have to fight this fight again. It's never really over. The idiots are always out there, and every generation has a responsibility to defend what others have fought for in the past and make sure that it perseveres and gets passed down to the future. So Star Trek is the hopeful message of what we can have if we choose to work together. And Star Wars is the reminder it ain't going to be free and you're going to have to fight to protect it.
Right. And so do you have like a favorite science fiction author from that era that, like I'm a John Brunner and Philip K. Dick guy, right? Who's my science fiction people, but do you have like ones that you're devoted to or
I guess it would have to be Bradbury. I mean,
yeah.
Bradbury just made the biggest influence on me. I loved especially his short fiction pieces like the Velt,
Yeah.
which sort of was all about holodecks really. And then he had one. I think he wrote a story. I'm pretty sure it was just called The Long Rain.
Mm.
Uh, I did an homage to that in one of my recent Star Trek novels, where the landing party goes to a planet where it's always raining, and not Ferenginar, a whole different planet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I grew up really loving Bradbury's work, and I remember getting term papers. I would write papers about him in high school. In one, I sort of examined the fact that he's got this rather pessimistic attitude toward technology unfettered, technology that runs amok or that is perverted away from its original intended use is very often the antagonistic force in a lot of his short fiction. Humans very often find themselves at the mercy of technology run amok or technology that proves more dangerous than they ever imagined. And I thought it was interesting that for a writer known primarily to the American public as a science fiction writer, that he seemed to have such a anti-technology attitude that pervades a lot of his work. So I remember writing a paper about that in high school. But despite this, particular oddity of his, just I can tell. I remember he is the childhood favorite author for me.
Yeah. So if you're ever in Indianapolis for WonderCon, or if you ever do that, make sure you go to the Ray Bradbury Center that now exists in Indianapolis. They moved his entire office and everything from it in Los Angeles to Indiana University in Indianapolis because the world's leading expert in Ray Bradbury was a professor there before he died. And
If I
they
go to
had
Indianapolis, it'll be for Gen Con.
Gen Con. I thought it was WonderCon. No, you're right. Okay, so I grew up in Indiana, so I gotta put a shout out for Indiana nerdery. But last time I was home, I went to the Bradbury Center and I got to sit in his writing chair. And yes, it's there. Now, he didn't write everything. He didn't write Fahrenheit 451 in that chair, but he did write Something Wicked This Way Comes. And if you plan it and you talk to the Ray Bradbury Center, they have a VHS of the original cut of Something Wicked This Way Comes, the one that Bradbury watched himself and gave notes on.
Wow.
Yeah, very cool stuff. So
I'm not going to be going back to Gen Con this year, but I may go back in some future year, and I'll keep that in mind.
Well, now you got more of a reason to go. Shout out to Indiana for that. And they also have the Kurt Vonnegut Museum there because he's from
love Vonnegut.
Yeah, he's from Indianapolis.
Yeah.
So just shout out on that. Some of my friends and I are doing that for the day before or the weekend before the solar eclipse coming up. And yeah, so you were into all this science fiction. When did you start writing? Like, because you ended up writing Star Trek, was it fan fiction or was it original stuff that you started with?
I mean, when I first started trying to put words on paper, I guess it was more autobiographical, memoir type crap that most teens with a lot of angst and too much time are wont to do. I didn't have any real map for what I was trying to write. I just sort of had this daydream of seeing my name on a book cover. And this was maybe around like the age of 9 or 10. And I would just start randomly typing pages. I had a knack for remembering other people's stories, but concocting my own out of thin air did not come naturally, at least not at first. So I would, just sort of watch a movie and I could recount the tale of the movie the next day at breakfast, much to my parents' chagrin. So I was doing that for a while, and I guess what really sort of broke me through into writing was screenwriting. And that kind of came together around the age of 15. My mom was taking business classes at night at a local community college. She saw they had a screenwriting class, same night and times as her class. And so I got permission from my high school to take college level screenwriting at the community college. And at 15, I went in, did a semester, aced the class, got an A in it. The instructor really liked my work. And then I had the screenwriting bug. And that's pretty much how I ended up going to NYU Film School, got my degree there. That led to writing for the College Humor magazine for a while. That led to working in magazines as an editor after I graduated, which is a remarkably terrible paying job, and that hasn't changed.
Yes.
And so what I got, though, is I was writing scripts, and Star Trek had Next Generation premiered my freshman year at college. Around the second year of Next Gen, they had what's called an open door policy, where anybody who wanted to write a full script, had to be a script, not a story proposal, a script in proper TV format. You could submit your spec script, and it would go into a giant slush pile. And they would pay interns and whatever to go through and read these and try to find anyone that doesn't suck. And, 999 out of 1,000, or actually more like, 999 or whatever, or 9,999 out of 10,000 would get thrown away. Almost nobody ever made it out of the slush pile. And so I started submitting scripts to the slush pile and collecting rejection letters. You were never allowed to have more than 2 scripts on submission at a time. And so there was this sort of circular, circulating pattern for me where I would just keep sending them in, collecting the rejections, never really knowing why. Never broke through at Next Gen, but they had the same policy at DS9. So eventually, I switched writing partners a couple of times, found one who had connections that could let us pitch. He and I figured out we had a good rhythm working together as script writers.
And this would be John Ordover, right?
That was John Ordover, yeah.
Who has been on this podcast before. So
he, at the time, was the editor of Star Trek Fiction at Simon & Schuster.
My favorite era, by the way. That was a foundational era of Star Trek Fiction for me. I love the Ordover era.
Yeah, the late 90s, early aughts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he had come over from Tor Books before that, I believe. But anyway, so yeah, he and I teamed up. He got us the pitch meeting. I had the script writing chops. We made some sales right off the bat. So my breakthrough, my first work as a writer professionally in fiction was writing for Star Trek on television. I'd never actually sold fiction in prose format to anybody before. I hadn't written any books, hadn't done comics yet. So my breakthrough was TV.
And an excellent episode, too.
Thank you.
Starship Down, right? That was the first one. Yeah.
Starship Down. And then the second one was called It's Only a Paper Moon. And that was in season 7. We also sold to Voyager, although it ended up not getting to script. It ended up not getting produced for reasons that had nothing to do with our story and just all about logistical problems in-house that were insurmountable. They liked the story. They bought it. They paid for it. They cannibalized some of it for parts over the years, but it never got made, which is too bad. I think it would have been a great episode. But that was what sort of broke me through. That was the breakthrough moment, got me a credit. Suddenly I could go to cons and get onto panels because, hey, I've written for Star Trek on TV, and suddenly that makes me somebody that gets put on a panel. I'm like, all right, sure, we'll do that. And started making connections, and I started working in the Pocket Books office as an assistant on a freelance basis, which mostly meant reading slush manuscripts and finding a reason to reject them, writing the letters of those rejections so the editors didn't have to waste their time doing it, writing reference materials for other Star Trek authors like Peter David, Michael Jan Friedman, and then eventually when something would come up there where they needed, let's say, pad out a manuscript that's come up a little bit short at the last minute and it's already late. They came to me one weekend and said, on a Friday, by Monday morning, can you get us 5,000 words in the format of a classified Starfleet report about the Genesis device? Not being a fool, I said, yes, of course I can do that. And then figured out how to do it and scrambled through the whole weekend, came in, turned it in. And that became, I believe, chapter 14 of John Vornholz's Genesis Wave, book 1. And from that, they said, okay, you execute quickly, you do clean work. Do you want to tackle a book? And I said, why would I not want to tackle a book? So they had a book that was already approved, the Starfleet Survival Guide. The concept had been developed in-house. They had an illustrator, there was an editor. They just needed somebody to write the damn thing. They said, do you want to write it? I said, let me get this straight. I don't have to pitch a book. You've already got it approved. We don't have to find it. It's all greenlit. I just come in, write it, and you pay me, and I get my name on the cover. They said, yep. I went, done.
Let's do it.
Let's do this thing. And so that was what led me into writing for Star Trek in print, was the Starfleet Survival Guide. Based on that, they said, hey, you can finish a book. Do you want to pitch to our new line of ebook novellas, our monthly ebook novellas? I said, hell yeah. And that got me into fiction. And then after a couple of those, the second one called Wildfire, big tragedy, but also, a big seller, made a big splash, got lots of great critical notice. And off that, I, got the call, which was, hey, somebody just dropped out of our big 9-book event for the fall next year. Can you take on writing 2 full-length novels back to back, and can you execute it in 5 months?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could do that. You always say yes. Somebody's offering you a paid book contract. You say, yes, I can do that. So I did that while at the same time, getting ready to get married and go on a honeymoon and deal with everything else and moving. But that broke through. One of those books hit the USA Today list, and I've been writing Star Trek novels ever since.
Well, and this is why I'm incredibly jealous of you and Greg Cox and Dayton Ward and all these guys, because I know how writer brain watches Star Trek. And I know when you guys are watching Star Trek, and let's say Captain Pike in an episode of Strange New Worlds makes a random comment about, Rigel 7 was a terrible thing.
Cakewalk compared to this.
But compared to this, and then the next thing you know, before you fall asleep that night, you've got a whole episode written in your head, which maybe can become a novel. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I got a notebook full of these. I can't do anything with them because no one's paying me to write them. But you guys do. And, when
we get lucky.
Yeah. Yes. And so when you watch Star Trek, are you constantly like jotting down notes of like, oh, I can use this later, and is this
I see possibilities. What I look for often is the uh, the lingering question. Something
right?
where they mention something, and it raises the question of, well, what was that, and why was that formative, and what was important about that? They don't go into it.
Yeah,
That could be explored. Anytime you find yourself saying, well, wait a minute, what was that? Well, boom.
yeah,
The moment you've done that, you've asked a compelling, dramatic question. This can compel you to go find a story. Once you tie it into a human story, something that somebody actually cares about, congratulations, you just found a story. And the more a universe like Star Trek gets built out, the more of these lingering questions there seem to be. Rather than exhausting story possibilities, the more developed a fictional universe like this gets, the more story possibilities it generates. It becomes more complex, a more integrated living thing, and you begin to see possible story connections everywhere.
yeah.
So in that respect, it's a very fertile ground just because it is so deep and layered and has been around for so long that there's always another question to ask.
Yeah. Well, and here's my perfect segue into Picard Firewall, because for me, the moment the Fenris Rangers were mentioned and Seven, my brain started like concocting all kinds of, and that's why, when you first announced this book, I was one of the first people to comment on Facebook, like, you lucky dog, this is the story that, because my first thought was that should be a series. That should be its own
That was what I
series. And
thought. I'm
yeah,
surprised they didn't do it.
right. And because one thing that I would like to see Star Trek do more of, no one's listening to me, right? But I would like to see Star Trek get away from Starfleet. I would like to see Star Trek.
I tried to steer Prodigy in that direction. I was overruled.
Right. And like I said, I could talk to you for hours about the dozen different projects that you've worked on, and maybe we can come back some other time and dive deeper into those. And I I watched you hilariously comment on some of the things that happened with you and Prodigy, which was a great show. I love Prodigy,
Oh, I
by the way.
love Prodigy. It's one of my
Yeah,
favorite things that Star Trek has done ever.
yeah, and so I'm a massive Prodigy fan. The finale brought a tear to my eye, like literally, like was
Beautiful
weeping.
thing.
Beautiful. But the Fenris Rangers and doing stories that are outside of, that's one of the things that makes Deep Space Nine great, is so many non-Starfleet characters, and
Mm-hmm.
it expands the world. And so what I love about Firewall is that, Janeway's there and there's a little bit of Starfleet here and there, but it's not a story of Starfleet. It's the story of Seven's basically coming of age in
Yes.
this situation. And, you know, if I were marketing this book, I would blurb it this way. This is Star Trek's Andor, right? Because,
That's high praise. That's a heck of a show to compare it to.
well, at least, I'm only going on the first 100 pages. However, what I'm
No,
what, what I'm seeing is that this is, um Seven gets turned down by Starfleet, right? Which is an interesting thing, and I
well, I
want to,
mean that's from canon. That's from Picard.
right. She gets turned by, and I thought you did a really good job of dealing with that in the book, because when that was said in Picard, I was like, why the hell would they turn down such a competent person?
Mm-hmm.
But the trauma of the Borg years is so deep. And I think
And
you walk,
remember, when Voyager comes home, it's 2378. They're only 5 years out from the last time the Borg were on Earth's doorstep and very nearly assimilated the whole planet. They
right,
they very narrowly avoided apocalypse, and they're only 5 years out from that. This is like almost like having a 9/11 event.
right. Right. And I think that you do a really good job in this book of setting that up. And so what I think is really, the first thing that I loved about this book was the fact that it's not on a starship, that it's in corners and you're seeing several different planets, and it comes with a map in the beginning, so it gives you a real sense of geography for what's going on in this corner of the Star Trek universe. And I think that expands it. It makes it deeper and better. And my writer brain, when I watch Star Trek, a lot of times I'm trying to I wish they would do more to remember that they're in space, right? Like to do space science, to do those things. And so what I really liked about this book is that it grounds the story in the real world with or in the real world of Star Trek by making it, so let's talk about that geography and how much of that, some of it was established in Una McCormick's book about the
Last
about
Best Hope.
yeah, which I thought was incredible, which I think is a really great start tie-in novel because it also brings in the politics of all this. So all this canon from Picard, and I'm a defender for the same reasons of the first season of Picard, that it's non-Starfleet. I love that. So how did you approach the canon of this from Picard? Did you rewatch the show a bunch of times? Did you did you already have it pretty imprinted, or did these ideas come to you easy on this?
Well, for instance, just as you did, the moment Fenris Rangers came on the screen, I believe it was either in episode 4 when they mentioned the word Fenris Rangers after Seven comes to their rescue and her ship is lost and they beam her aboard. It was either then or during Stardust City Rag the following week. One of those, I paused the episode, picked up my phone, and immediately emailed my editor and said, I want to write a Fenris Rangers novel. My editor's a Nighthawk like me. She responds at like 2 a.m. You and everyone else. She said, but no, the show producers have told us to go hands off with the Fenris Rangers, at least for now. They don't know how they intend to use them going forward. We have to wait before we can play with that particular toy in the toy box. A couple of years later, I'm at lunch with my editors soliciting work, and they said, well, we finally were told we can play with the Fenris Rangers toy. Would you like to write the story of how, when, and why Seven joins the Fenris Rangers? I said, why, yes, I would. So I jumped on that story. I mean, that was one that I thought, was ripe with possibilities. And I had already watched all of Picard, during its first run. I, of course, had copies of the scripts. I'm on a lot of the distribution lists. So I was seeing stuff from behind the scenes, finding out stuff from my friends who work at CBS. So I had a lot of, research material already at hand. And then as I began to dig into this particular story, Seven's story, that was when I began seeing the possibilities. I started tying all the threads together. And that was what led to this story. And I was like, how do I justify what has been said in canon, where she says she tried to join Starfleet, she was denied, she applied to the academy, she was told to get lost. She said at that point, I just went full Ranger. That's her line. I went full Ranger. And the way she says it, it sounds like it's very cause and effect. Because of this, they did this, so I did that. And that to me felt like it's not something where there's going to be a long delay between the action and the reaction. They do this, so she does that. So I said, okay, this probably happened pretty soon after Voyager came home. And then I began to look at what was established about the Voyager crew in shows like Prodigy, where they started talking about some of their backstory, because they make extensive use of Janeway, both Admiral Janeway and their holographic version of Janeway. And I knew from that, okay, Voyager got put basically into museum status almost immediately after it got home. It got taken out of commission as a ship of the line. Chakotay got promoted and sent over to the Protostar Project. So he's already on a top secret, brand new cutting edge thing over here. Tom and B'Elanna go off to have their kid. Harry Kim finally gets a long overdue promotion and gets put back on starship duty. Tuvok gets a job at Starfleet Command. The Doctor's off doing a speaking tour for holographic sentient rights. Everybody's off doing their own thing, which means that Seven's found family, her emotional safety net that she's relied on for years, is just gone. Like, she's come home to a planet she's really never been to, or if she has, she doesn't remember it, to an aunt she barely remembers, to a culture she doesn't know. Her found family is gone, except for Janeway, who's trying to do things for her. And she comes back to a culture she was told would welcome her home, and instead it treats her with fear and suspicion. She has clear Borg implants that she can't remove without basically killing herself. And they question her motives, they question her background, even the fact that she doesn't want to have her Federation name. Like, they're going to try and resurrect her. They thought she was dead 20 some years ago, and suddenly they got to resurrect her, and they go, okay, well, we'll pull up the records for Annika Hansen. She says, no, my name is Seven of Nine. Well, that's going to freak them out a little bit, because that's a Borg designation. That's the last thing they want to hear at that point. And what does that tell them? That she identifies as Borg? That she, is she, in league with them? Does she still, see herself as being aligned with them? Why would she choose to keep that designation? And so this just raises a lot of alarm bells in a culture that's already scarred, and is not quite, gotten used to. They haven't really ever dealt with an ex-Borg. They haven't dealt with liberated Borg yet. When she first comes home, she's one of the first they've encountered, and they don't know what to make of her. So she comes home, and this life she's been promised isn't there. She's not welcome. She's treated in many ways like a pariah. And what happens is, in the book, at one point, and in the, I think in some of the Picard episodes, she said, that she didn't want to put Janeway's career at risk, because Janeway kept putting herself out there and threatening to walk, threatening to resign her commission. And she makes it sound like she walked away for Janeway's benefit. And my take on that was, that's what she says, but the reality is that Seven had to get out of there because she felt humiliated. She felt angry. She felt rejected, and she was afraid. And she rationalizes it by saying, well, I don't want any more political blowback to hit my friend Janeway. But what's really happening is she's saying, you people have told me I'm trash. You've told me I'm not welcome here. You've told me I don't have any rights, and you don't respect who I am, and you're afraid of me, and I'm not safe, and you've humiliated me, and I'm going to go find a better life. And that's what's really going on with her. So you were right. I mean, you hit it right on the head when you said a coming of age tale. This is structured like a classic Bildungsroman. It is, the character must leave home to go on a journey of self-discovery. They will face trials and adversity, and through that adversity, they will achieve maturity and independence. And that is essentially the story of Firewall. It's about Seven finally having to leave home, cut that metaphorical apron string that connects her to Janeway, her surrogate mother figure, and go out into the galaxy and try to figure out who the hell she is after having all of her formative years stolen by the Borg. She lost her childhood, her adolescence, and her young adulthood, all gone. The years really, we all take for granted when we figure out who we are. They stole really, it from her.
Her time on Voyager, and when I had Brandon Braga on this show, we talked about Voyager, her years on Voyager as being her Starfleet Academy. So one of the things that makes it ultra insulting to her to be turned down by Starfleet Academy is, I've been serving on a starship in an extreme situation, and I saved their ass a million times, right?
Well, she also mutinied, tried to steal the ship a whole bunch of times, and did so using violence.
Which
would have the problem, right? She's unpredictable. She's a wild card.
And what I think part of what you're doing with Firewall and doing the coming of age story is bridging that gap between the Seven, who was the wild card on Voyager, but super skilled, to the captain of the Enterprise G, right? And
I'm not even so much thinking about that as just trying to get her to where she would be a Fenris Ranger. I'm just trying
Right.
to get her to independence. The other thing that I wanted to address was we went from she had this very cis heteronormative sort of acclimation period aboard Voyager. But by the time we catch up with her in Picard, she's clearly has embraced and become comfortable with the fact that she is queer. She's very clearly bisexual at the very least.
Yeah. And
And that
we'll come back to that because you've been very clear about what this book does with that, and I have questions on
sure.
that, and I want to
All
get
right,
there.
we'll get there. Fine.
We'll get there. But what I think, this is a huge part of when you see where Seven is in season 3 of Picard.
Mm-hmm.
You have to see, a lot of those roots and how they grew, and I think obviously they want the mentorship of Picard to mean something, but we also have to see how she gets to the point where you owe me a ship, Picard, is her introduction to him. And that's where I say this is kind of like the Andor of modern Star Trek, because what you have going on here is a story of a rebel,
Yeah.
and doing that. Now, as a 30-year vegan, there is a funny scene in this book where Seven is trying to get her replicator will only make kimchi. And I just wanted to ask, did you imply here that Seven of Nine is a vegetarian? Because I am in favor of this, but it seemed like she did not want to eat replicated meat in that scene. It's a little
Not,
thing, but
not,
important.
yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know so much that she's a strict vegetarian or a
Mm-hmm.
strict vegan. It's just that at that particular moment, she wanted vegetarian. She had an appetite for something specific, and the stupid replicator just wouldn't make it. She doesn't seem to have much
It's a
of a
funny
problem
scene.
with the cuisine that's served in the mess hall of the Fenris Rangers, where they're talking about the meat adjacent identifier. I don't know if you've gotten to that part yet.
I did get to that part.
Yeah,
Yes.
where they're talking about the
That's
meat
one of the reasons
identifier. She doesn't
why.
that doesn't bother her.
Okay.
So she's not averse to meat, especially, she's probably not going to worry about it because by that point in the 24th century, most of it is probably synthetically produced protein. It's lab
Exactly.
grown protein that doesn't actually come from an actual sentient animal. It's probably mostly a lab synthesized protein or even just molecularly resequenced protein. Um, Vegetarian or vegan diet at that point would be more of a health, and dietary, uh, concern than a moral concern at that point, since the animal has been taken out of the equation.
Yeah.
Uh, but there could still be moral arguments made, et cetera, et cetera. But I didn't intend to say that she was necessarily strict
Fair enough.
vegetarian, but simply that she wanted vegetarian lasagna. She likes it, and the stupid machine wouldn't make it.
Now, one of the reasons why this I think sets up, and again I make the Andor comparison, is this is a noir story. It is a very um it has noir edges, has noir
It's very
setting.
cyberpunk, I think is how
Yes.
somebody else described it.
Yeah, it has that kind of vibe or tone to the setting. Not so
It's
much.
very the urban sections are very Blade Runner.
Yes. And so that's one thing I want to put out there that people should know about this book. But I think, and I had to resist posting something on Facebook about you doing this and saving this for the interview. But you got a word into the Star Trek universe. Now, everyone got excited when Tilly said that's fucking cool for the first time, but you got a word into the Star Trek universe that I am super excited that you did. And that is, you got the word mosh into Star Trek. And you have Seven of Nine meeting her first Andorian encounter with
A one night stand.
one night stand in the middle of a mosh pit. And you explain why Seven enjoys the mosh pit and the communal nature of when somebody falls down, you pick somebody up. I'm an old school hardcore kid. I come from punk rock backgrounds, And so
That was my experience with mosh pits when I was out in the West Coast and out in like the San Jose area.
yeah. I love that. That was a great scene.
It's a very punk book. It's a lot of punk music inspired this book, particularly new punk like Amyl and the Sniffers out of Australia.
Awesome. So I want people to know that you worked Mosh into that. Now,
I was also the first writer to get the word "fuck" into the Star Trek universe on an official basis.
oh, really?
I beat TV to it by years.
And which book was that?
Star Trek Vanguard, Book 5, Precipice. Character Cervantes Quinn, soldier of fortune, is on a planet with Bridget McClellan, aka Bridie Mack, who's a Starfleet intelligence agent at that point. The Klingons invade the planet. He decides to defend the locals. Bridie Mack says, "We can't get involved. It's a prime directive problem." And he looks at her and he says, "Yeah, well, I ain't in Starfleet, so fuck your prime directive." And he grabs a weapon and he leaves the ship. And it got through. So I got the F bomb into Star Trek somewhere around maybe 2010. I beat them to it by several years.
That's cool. That's cool. But you got Mosh in there.
I got Mosh. I did get Mosh.
And you put 7 of 9 in a mosh pit. And so I gotta give you credit for that. For me, it's funny that I definitely was like, because you know what was funny is because, as I said, I've definitely thought about the Fenris Rangers before, and so I was very curious how you were going to do all this, and I had the thought. Now I don't know if I would have pushed that particular envelope. So credit to David Mack for doing that. Wonderful.
Which envelope? The mosh pit envelope?
Yes, I love that. That you did that.
I wanted to explore her life in exile as she's searching for herself. I wanted to at least take some time so that we could feel like we were on that part of her personal journey with her.
Yeah. Keep talking. I'm going to let my dog out of my office.
Yeah, I really enjoyed writing the scenes with Seven, sort of in exile. Little things like when she's going to work and she chooses a place to work that reminds her of the inside of a Borg cube, or when she's like out on the streets and she's wearing like a deep, sort of a hooded cowl, because she's trying to hide the Borg implants between that and her hair, because she knows while she can probably take any one of these people one-on-one in a fight, she knows that if you get an angry mob around you, you're screwed. And she has learned to live with a healthy amount of fear and suspicion. She's learned not to trust people, especially not large groups of them. So
right. Well, and so, and then my question now is, we'll do a little bit more selling of this book here. But I think at this point, if you're a Star Trek fan and you haven't already said, okay, I definitely need to read this one. I think, 7 of 9, the trajectory of the character, especially because I think a lot of us all had that same reaction the first time they showed her without the Borg makeup, of being kind of like, oh, come on, what are we doing? Because, I think the fact that she's turned into such a great character when it was kind of a, and I talked to Brandon about this when he was on the podcast about, I admit that my first reaction was, oh, this is sexist. What are they doing? And
I remember at the time my line was, oh, it's the 7 of 9 show, also starring the cast of Voyager.
Right. And so she became a very interesting character because her story was fascinating, to take somebody from being a Borg, and we did it so quick with Jean-Luc Picard because we had to move on.
Well, he was assimilated only for a matter of hours.
Not
where 7 has come out after 18 years
of stolen childhood, no less.
Stolen childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood. All of her formative years stripped and stolen away from her. When the rest of us feature granted that we're finding out who we are, she lost all that time.
Right. And all those things make her an interesting character. And then also what makes this book an interesting time for 7 and for you as a writer is that that loss of that safety net of Voyager, and having to also, like, she was in the Delta Quadrant. Now she's, they've all got homes to go to. They've all got families to go to. She has the one aunt, she was
Who
going to be
still flinches when she hugs her because of the implants, and who
right.
dead names her because she can't call her Seven.
Right. Now let's talk about the whole. Now when you approached this, now you've been very clear that you wanted to tell people, because there are the people who are. I don't know how this happens in Star Trek. How there's people that are afraid of
That are angry about it being woke.
woke, right? And
Yeah. I
which
didn't want anyone to feel like they were misled into buying a book thinking it's an action thing with no progressive message whatsoever. I wanted to be very clear up front. This book, pro woke, pro trans, pro queer. I make no bones about it. Her Seven is an iconic character to the queer and trans community. She is important to them. She is, a transformative character for them. So she had to be treated with respect, and those aspects of what she represents had to be acknowledged. To not acknowledge them would be to do a disservice to the character and a disservice to the fans.
Yeah, and one that when and I highly recommend people go back and check out my interview with Brandon Braga. I did two. I did one on specifically on Orville season 3, but when we talked about this, I we talked for a little bit about the idea also of Seven being an icon, much like Spock, much like Data, of autism,
Yeah, for
being
being
on the
an
spectrum.
outsider,
Yeah,
for feeling like a freak.
yeah, and especially now, my day job, I work with kids with autism, so um, and so be the idea, not so much of kids with like serious autism, but like for people who I don't want to say non, I guess that comes off sounding weird, but for people on the spectrum, Seven is definitely an icon too, because her social anxiety is things that
Mhm.
they can relate to, and so those things are important as well about Seven, and her being a hero for all these parts of the community. And some people don't understand the trans things, but also she's that because she had to establish her own identity. She had to recreate herself from, having been, part of a collective, like
Mhm.
of another species. So this is all very important stuff. And I
Yeah.
think one of the things you're doing, David, that's really great with this novel is taking all that very seriously. So what part of the process, I mean, you had to, how early on were you like, it's going to be all these things from the very beginning? Was that a,
I knew from the beginning that that
yeah,
was what I wanted it to be. I knew that the parts of her that are Borg, that have been grafted to her, that can't physically be removed, and which are very visible, therefore, to those around her. I thought that that made an excellent allegory for both trans identity and queer identity, in that it marks her as a minority. It marks her as somebody who is visibly different, and therefore someone is going to be, the subject of either fear or suspicion, or even just persecution. And so I figured between that and the fact that there's an issue that comes up in Picard season 3, where Todd Stashwick's character, Captain Liam Shaw, is deliberately dead naming her. He does it because he knows it ticks her off, and he's got his whole problem with the Borg.
yeah,
And it's such a dick move that he's doing it, but it
yeah,
shows that the practice continues, and they know it's a dick move. And so I was like, okay, so let's take that back. Let's roll the clock back 20 years, where someone isn't doing it just to get a rise out of her. They're doing it, A, maybe they don't know better, or B, because they're in denial that she really would want to keep her Borg designation, which is the identity that she now possesses and has come to own. She has owned who she is.
yeah.
Um,
Because that was
so
what her name was on Voyager, and that was her first home.
right. So
Yeah,
and she isn't Annika anymore. That name doesn't mean anything to her. And people who insist on continuing to push this identity on her that she has outgrown, that she doesn't identify with, it's an insult to her. It's an insult to her independence. It's an insult to her autonomy.
and
It's an
and
insult to her independence.
and it's a reminder of the trauma of being taken by the Borg as
Yeah,
well.
which also doesn't do anybody any favors.
Right.
So yeah, so there's that. So that is an issue that'll come up through the book and factors into the ending, which you haven't gotten to yet. So I'll try not to spoil that too much. And one of the things that is that is a recurring theme, and it plays through the book. And the fact that she also is canonically a queer character, thanks to Picard, meant that also had to be addressed, and again had to be addressed respectfully and seriously. So I approached that in sort of having her going through this phase of her life, having discovered this aspect of herself, and she's exploring this and trying to put it in context of who she is and who she wants to be. So through the course of the book, she's going to meet the character who I think of as the first great love of her life, which is going to be this Trill woman, Ellery Cade, a fellow Fenris Ranger. And they're going to basically, it's like a moment of magnetic connection when they first meet. There's definitely a potential in the air. Everybody around them can sense, something is happening here. And then they basically bond. She's going to be there for Ellery when something goes wrong and Ellery needs somebody to step in and save her ass. Ellery's going to be there when Seven needs her. And they're just going to basically bond. And like some of the tropes that I know sometimes drive queer fans crazy because they just keep coming up are things like bury your gaze. Not in this book. Not this
Awesome.
The tragic queer. Oh yeah, sure. They can have the relationship, but it has to end tragically. Not this one. No, screw it. I had no use for it. That's out the airlock. Bye bye. The person of color who must die to show the situation is serious. Nope, no thanks. Couldn't use it. We'll kill the white guy. He can go. But the interesting person of color, Lucan Sagasta, the Fenris Ranger described as having dark brown skin and a white Cheshire Cat smile, who's constantly joking around and is said to be the ladies' man and the hotshot. He gets through the story unscathed. He's going to stick around. He's not going anywhere.
And one interesting thing about, because I was paying attention to your post when you were working on this book, so I kind of saw, because I've been following this one from the beginning, because this is one I wanted. This is one I wanted to inject right into my veins. And so when you were writing this, I was noting the interesting meta nature of what was going on in the world with the actors who, with Jerry Ryan and, Michelle Hurd being leaders of the,
strike.
Of the SAG actress strike. And
Jerry Ryan's a goddamn hero.
Yeah. And so I'm sure that kind of influenced your some of the feeling and vibe of what was going on for this, right? Because you were writing this when this was all going on.
Yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, I knew that I wanted the character to, for want of a better term, to be a social justice warrior.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the themes of a lot of the punk that I love best, a lot of it is socially conscious. There's a lot of righteous fury at social injustice, especially in the music that inspired this particular book and this take on the character. So I wanted that to come through. I wanted her to be someone who, because of her past, because of the way the Borg used her to hurt other people, because of the way that she was used in that method, she feels like she's on a journey of atonement, that she's seeking redemption. So she is looking for something where a path in life that will let her be there to defend the weak and the helpless, to stand up against those who would prey on the less fortunate, to be there to basically stand up for what's right, to defend those who would have otherwise nobody to defend them. As she says near the end of the book, which we haven't got to, the impetus for the title is where she tells Janeway, when governments abandon their people, I plan to be there, to defend the innocent from evil. I will be the firewall that defends the innocent from evil. And that's that's how she sees herself. She wants to be that person, the watcher on the wall who keeps evil at bay.
And have you reached out to Jerry Ryan in any of this?
I,
Do you know if she's got the
oh,
book?
just the other day, I happened to compliment her for the bringing the character to life with such complexity and nuance while I was talking about my hopes for the book. She didn't repost it, but she did click like. So I screenshotted that. So she did like the post. Granted, I had to tag her and compliment her, but she clicked like. Maybe next time we'll get her to repost, but baby steps.
Yeah, she's busy and she was
She's a
doing a
very
lot
busy
of
person. She's
leadership
got a
and
lot
stuff.
going on.
Yeah. I would figure eventually she's gonna find it. She's
One would hope.
probably bummed she didn't get to do her Fenris Ranger show, but she'll take being the captain of the Enterprise, right? So
Yeah. If that should come about, then that would be, I think, a consolation prize most people could live with.
yeah, I don't know anything for anything, but
I don't know.
one of
Nobody
my
tells.
fears is that legacy is not happening to punish some of that leadership, or that we haven't gotten announcements or whatever. I can't say that that's real. I got a weird
I
feeling.
can't speak to that speculation at all. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So so one of the things that really like one of my favorite interactions that we've had talking about Star Trek through the internet was when how upset you got about the person standing on Prodigy inside the warp bubble. I believe it was, or was it the Protostar? It was the Protostar they were standing on, and we had a whole discussion after the episode and you were like, "That's not how warp bubbles work," and I loved that you uh took the time. It was like a Friday night, and I got this very long comment from David Mack on my Facebook about how warp bubbles work. And I was like, God, what a glorious nerd. I love this.
I mean, the whole thing about merging warp bubbles, it was devised for a specific purpose, and that's the exact opposite. Everything we were ever told about, the synchronization of warp bubbles, everything in canon says the exact opposite of what they did. I'm like, how did you look at the same reference material that I looked at and draw the exact opposite conclusion of what it says in black and white it is? That's like saying, well, it says it's white, therefore it must be black. No.
Right. Now, they did not listen to you on the warp bubble. You brought that up. I know you did, and they did
Oh,
not.
I flagged it. No, actually, maybe, yeah, I would have flagged it. Yeah.
Yeah, you flagged it for them. They did not listen to you, but they did listen to you on the finale, and you did have a big impact on the
On
emotional.
some things, but not on others.
Right. Now,
There's
but
one element of the finale I wish they had taken my advice on. They did not, and I don't know how it plays out because I was only employed on season one, the first 20 episodes. The upcoming second season, which will premiere on Netflix, I was not working on that one. So I was
right.
already sort of out of the picture when they convened the writer's room for that. So I don't know where they go with it, but I know the one thing I sort of suggested and got overruled on for the season one finale was, they've come home to Earth, or they've reached Earth. They've gone through all this sort of stuff, and somehow they concoct a way, a reason, a rationale to put these guys on the Protostar, or on whatever the new ship is, the new Protostar type ship. And I guess they used like one suggestion I gave them, which was, you can make them warrant officers, which is like below a real officer but above an enlisted man, and it's used for technical specialists. And I think they found that to be useful, so they took that. But I said at the time, the note I sent back the first time was, you guys have a brilliant opportunity here to do something Star Trek has never done, and which could open up a ton of possibilities no one has ever had. I said, don't put them on a Starfleet ship. Put them on a civilian diplomatic transport. One that has some defenses. It's got shields. It's maybe got some weaponry for self-defense, but nothing on the level of a capital ship in Starfleet. Put them on a diplomatic vessel. with the Starfleet, the Federation Diplomatic Corps, diplomats, ambassadors, cultural specialists. You can have a whole range of interesting folks. Go civilian. I go, they don't have to go through the academy. You don't have to explain why they skipped 4 years at the academy. I said, you bypass all that and you keep your character design as it is without having to suddenly put them all into Starfleet uniforms and rob each of them of their individuality. So you keep your character designs, you keep them as civilians, you evade the whole Starfleet Academy problem, and you send them out on a civilian ship. So because it's a civilian ship, Prime Directive doesn't apply. Prime Directive only applies to Starfleet. They don't want the military getting involved in other people's crap. Diplomats do this shit all the time. They do it all the time on Trek. Diplomats go out there and mess with people's crap all the time. I said, put them on a diplomatic transport and then send them back to Gwyn's people. I said, it's the perfect excuse. Who else would you send if you're trying to make peaceful contact with the Vanakat? You'd send them back their own people, and you'd send, if you know that through the first time loop, that sending a Starfleet ship caused mayhem, well, maybe don't send a Starfleet ship. Maybe the trick is to send civilians and send them people they recognize, who they can talk to. They didn't see any value in
brilliant.
This.
It's brilliant. Well, and
that's what I would have suggested. That's the way I would have gone.
I think the warrant officer thing too puts them with Janeway. That's smart too. I can see that.
There's arguments in favor of going both ways. I felt like it would have given them a personality and an identity that Star Trek has never had before. It would have allowed them to chart completely new ground, to not be beholden to anything that's been established before. I mean, they could have just been trailblazers all the way.
Right.
But at the same time, Star Trek is associated so strongly with Starfleet and that aesthetic that I could see the value in wanting to preserve that connection.
Well, and anyone who's listened to, I do a panel after every season of Star Trek with some of my peeps here, and anybody who's listened to my episodes know I've been saying forever I would love to have a Star Trek show that was an old Starfleet ship being reused by journalists going around. That's an excuse to be trekking around the Federation, like, covering stories. You get into adventures doing that, and then you have a whole new thing too. And so a lot of them are probably saying like, oh, these guys think alike, because by putting them in a diplomatic corps ship or having they're out of the safety net, which is of Starfleet, right?
Yeah. Now you're right here, and you have to survive by, well, talking your way out of things. You can't shoot your way out. Now you've got to basically find a diplomatic solution. That's your job. That's the whole idea.
Well, yeah, and so for mine, I'm always thinking like, what about Spotlight in the Star Trek universe? Like a bunch of reporters on a ship. I would love to see that. I just want to see.
I mean, I think that the fact that they're all reporters on a ship maybe is a bit limiting. I could see, for instance, you've got a reporter embedded on a ship. Like, for instance, there's like when I got my start writing for Trek in prose, it was on a monthly ebook novella series called Starfleet Corps of Engineers.
Oh yeah, Ordever talked about working with you on those.
Keith DeCandido was the editor on most of those. I worked a lot with Keith, and the idea was you had ships devoted to the Starfleet Corps of Engineers, and they were smaller ships, not your big ships. These were little ships, crew of maybe 40, 50 people. And a lot of them, you had some core crew whose job was run the ship, but you also had the rest of it was engineering mission specialists. Now you had a specialist in mechanical engineering. You had
those were neat books. They were
so you have all these engineering specialists. Now imagine a Corps of Engineers ship with an embedded journalist.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking, you have a crew that's there to take care of them and do the crew things, and they're at odds all the time with the journalists who are like, they run the ship and we're the ones that run the news division, and then you kind of have
The
that
trick
kind of
is the problem there is that the people who run the ship in any matter involving the ship, they're always going to win because you cannot run any ship, even a
okay.
civilian ship, as a democracy. A ship is always a dictatorship by necessity because if it isn't, everyone's going to die.
Sure. Now, so when you to get back to Firewall and to what you're doing with this, um, are we going to get more Fenris Ranger books? If is there more? Do you have you?
None are planned.
Yeah. Now, if
I
we
wrote this to be a standalone story.
okay, but now if
Uh,
we get enough people out there buying this, could you fit in some?
Possibly write another Fenris Rangers adventure with uh, Seven and her new partner slash lover Ellery Cade and the lovable band of Fenris Ranger rogues getting into frontier adventure. Hell yeah, it could be done. It would not be the same type of book. Thematically, it would probably be different. There'd have to be a different journey of different theme, a different lesson for Seven to absorb. But yeah, I mean, if the book sold so well that Simon and Schuster had to go, well, we should make more of these.
Well, see,
But
now you got your
I think
mission
it's
out there, listeners.
yeah,
Like help sell this book so we can get more. I
that's
mean,
so. I'm not going to say it's impossible. It could happen. Of course, I'm kind of hoping they'll tap me to write a Strange New Worlds novel at some point. But you never know. But I
we
wouldn't say
want you to
no
do
to
that too.
another visit of Seven.
Right. God, I'd love to see your take on Strange New Worlds. But the thing about this part of the expanded universe is that one thing that I can feel your joy on is that when you tell the story about like pausing the show and immediately writing your editor, like I'm sure you were just pinching yourself writing a lot of this, like and getting to tell it, and it comes off on the page. So
Yeah. And I think part of what also comes through on the page is that I really identify, with these characters I'm writing because as a kid I was, the favorite target of the bullies, pretty much from the beginning of say middle school all the way through almost the end of high school. I know what it's like to be afraid to leave your house because you don't know if you're going to make it to the bus stop without getting your ass kicked. I know what it's like to fear recess. I remember having, my personal belongings defaced, my car, graffitied. Uh, I remember being the outcast. I remember being the target, the weirdo, the one they don't understand, and therefore there must be something wrong with me. So I remember being the guy who took the shit, and I didn't really get to enjoy life and basically just be me until I got to college. And I had to leave town and come all the way to New York City. I left the small town I grew up in and I came to New York at 18 and I just never left. I've been here 36, 37 years now because I came to New York. And once I got here, I was able to be the me I wanted to be. I came here and I left behind the baggage of who I was and became who I wanted to be. And part of that too was, legally I changed my name after college to match that of my stepfather who raised me. So I understand the difficulty of, changing one's name, what, the significance of that is in terms of how it relates to one's perception of self-identity. So I
sure.
really, had a personal stake emotionally in what these characters, and particularly Seven, are going through. I was able to find analogs for a lot of it, for the alienation, the loneliness, the fear, the sense of persecution. I was able to find analogs for all of it in my own past, and it made me sympathetic to the character in a very tangible way.
Well, and people are rightfully very excited about and want Star Trek Legacy to become a thing, and it could not hurt if a book like this really like
Flies
generate
off the shelves.
flies off the shelves. So I'm not gonna say you could make Star Trek Legacy happen by reading Firewall and buying
All
it.
I'm going to say is if my book helps in some way bring about legacy, I just hope they put me in the room. Just put me in the writers' room, please, please.
Yeah.
I'll even be quiet. I'll sit in the corner. I won't eat too much at lunch. I won't take all the good sushi.
Well, and I really appreciate the vibe and the energy on this one. Before we go, really quick, if people are like, well, they're already on their way to buy this book online, they want to pick up another David Mack Star Trek book. Is there one that you particularly have close to your heart that is another Star Trek book? Because you've written, I don't even know how many, like
Uh,
a lot.
this one, I believe, Firewall is my 31st Star Trek novel.
Wow.
Uh, I've written 38, 39 novels total, but yeah, this is 31 for Star Trek, which at this point makes me the third most prolific author of Star Trek novels in the history of the franchise. I'm one Star Trek novel contract away from tying for second place, and two contracts away from taking second place.
Wow. And is second place
Michael
still
J.
active?
Friedman.
Is who?
Michael Jan Friedman, still
Oh,
alive, but not currently
not
working
active. So
on.
you can take
I
he's written a lot of really good Star Trek too.
He did. He is one of the acclaimed masters,
Yeah.
and I will never catch up to number one, which is Peter David at
Yeah.
45. He had the advantage, however, of writing during an era when they were publishing two Star Trek books a month, as
Yeah.
opposed to five a year, which is what they
Yeah.
do now. And back then, the Star Trek novels were about 70,000 words apiece, and now they're about 100 to 120.
Yeah.
So the level of difficulty under which I operate is a bit higher. The competition, a lot meaner. The opportunities, many fewer. The fact that I've made it as far as I have is kind of remarkable. So
Yeah.
if I was going to steer somebody toward other Trek work, I guess my most enduring work is the Star Trek Destiny trilogy.
Mhm.
It's no longer in continuity. Picard pretty much undid the literary continuity of the last 20 years of Star Trek books. But for about 20 years there, from around 2003 to about maybe, or actually 2001 up to about 2021, the Star Trek books had their own sort of self contained continuity set after the finales of the TV shows and after most of the movies. And we changed the status quo, we changed characters' lives, we altered the state of the galaxy, and the changes carried forward in a serial manner from book to book, author to author, coordinated by the authors themselves and by the editors. And a lot of what set big changes in motion in that version of the Trek universe, in the literary universe, was my Star Trek Destiny trilogy, which can be described as the all-time final showdown, end-all be-all between Federation and the Borg. Two civilizations enter, only one leaves. And you actually find out the origin, the alpha of the Borg, and the ending, the omega of the Borg. An astute reader might notice some minor similarities between that and season 3 of Picard.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. um David, it was awesome talking to you about Firewall. I will be posting a very detailed review
I look forward to it.
when I get to it, but you can already know part of it's going to be the Andor of the modern Star Trek.
That's a pull quote for the ages, brother.
Yeah, and I firmly believe that if people have stuck with us this far, I do have one announcement I got to make. My next science fiction novel, People's Park, comes out in March, and I am doing a book release party in the town it's takes place in, Bloomington, Indiana, the day before April 7th, the day before the total solar eclipse. So you can come to Indiana and go to the book review or the book release party and stay for the planets aligning and the sun going dark. We're one of the best places in the country to see it. So, and I should note, and this is why you should be listening, Trekkers, that the Bloomington, Indiana festivities are hosted by one William Shatner. And yes, so William Shatner is apparently singing a song right before the solar eclipse at the
Oh, I hope
stadium.
it's not Tambourine Man.
I hope not, but he is hosting the Indiana University festivities at the Memorial Stadium in Bloomington, Indiana. So you can come for my book release party the day before and stay for that. So
In the
People's Park,
words, stay for the darkness.
right? People's Park is a coming of age. It's a punk rock coming of age science fiction novel set in 1989 Indiana with skateboards, not bikes. Uh, and some really weird shit goes on, and it's very Phil Dickian for those of my peeps who like Philip K. Dick. So, highly recommend people come out for that. And but more importantly, right now, pick up Firewall, spread the word. Tell your libraries to make sure they have it. Most libraries carry Star Trek stuff, but if they don't have it, tell them.
And tell them it's a hardcover, so it'll last a good long time on the shelf.
That's right. So tell your library, and I'm sure eventually you'll get a paperback release, and maybe we'll come back and
Probably about a year from now.
Yeah, so maybe when you do paperback, we'll do a spoiler heavy nuts and bolts.
We can dig into more story specific analysis of it.
That's right. So look forward to that.
I would love that.
Yeah. Well, you gave me a lot of great insight, and I appreciate that. And I hope folks enjoyed this. David, you're one of my favorite Star Trek nerds. I will never forget the warp bubble 10 o'clock on a Friday night commentary was I remember responding to it saying, "You are a glorious nerd, sir. Thank you for saying this." And, and I meant it. I meant it. So thank you. And I hope folks enjoyed this, and we will be back. The next episode of this here podcast is The Roads Must Roll from 1940 by Robert Heinlein, featuring Ted Hand and Juan San Miguel, breaking down that story. And next we're doing Theodore Sturgeon's Microcosmic God. So that's going to be a doozy. And I got some big guests for that one. So come back for those two. Hopefully talk to you folks soon. Thank you, David, for your time.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a blast.